Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, Doug Ford has an extraordinary news conference this week in which he explodes at some Ontario judges.
The Financial Accountability Officer reports that Trump's tariffs could push Ontario into a recession.
And Ontario is facing the largest measles outbreak in 30 years. Critics say the government isn't doing enough to stop the spread.
And in your column, my column, I look at some of the big challenges facing a new prime minister.
And I've got a column on an election night story you didn't hear a single thing about, but may be the most important story of the night.
It's Friday, May 2nd, 2025, so let's get to it.
JMM, good to see you again, pal.
Hello,
Little
sir.
Sugar to start with, as always. I love your May the 4th
Yes,
T-shirt.
Yes, it's once a year. I like to break it out.
Yeah.
More than once a year, but particularly now.
A couple of days early, but
Yes.
it's a Star Wars thing, right? May the 4th be with you.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
I think, was it 2 elections ago, the writs were issued on May the 4th for a June election, and so I got that felt particularly timely.
Now, because we're so close to May the 4th, I also thought about an anniversary that happens on May the 4th,
Yes.
which relates to Premier Leslie Frost, who was actually sworn in as Premier for the first time on May 4th, 1949, and died on May the 4th, 1973. But as you can see, I am not going with Leslie Frost today because we have a better anniversary to talk about today. If you want to, who's back there on camera 3? Dave, is that you? Okay, if you want to come in and zoom in on Mr. Frank Miller here, there we go. I'll lean over there so you can see the whole thing. That's Frank Miller's portrait. He is the 19th Premier of the province of Ontario, and it was 40 years ago today, May 2nd, 1985, that we had one of the most consequential elections in Ontario history. Frank Miller won that election, and what made the election so interesting was he won it, but then he lost power.
Yes.
So that was a weird election. The Frank Miller Conservatives got 52 seats. The Ontario Liberals under David Peterson got 48 seats. The New Democrats under Bob Rae got 25 seats, so a hung parliament, and Bob Rae became the kingmaker. And he decided, along with David Peterson, to defeat Frank Miller. And there was no election after the government was defeated. Frank Miller went to the lieutenant governor and simply said, I cannot command the confidence of the House anymore. These two folks over here think they can, Peterson and Rae. They wrote out an accord of items that they agreed on. And I'll pull my Peterson shirt out of the closet later in June when the first Liberal government in 42 years was sworn in, and so came to an end a 42-year-long Tory dynasty from 1943 to 1985, and Frank Miller was the last premier of that Tory dynasty.
You know, there's a bunch of different ways we could go with this story. I mean, the first thing that always comes to mind is I think a lot of Canadian political observers are like still 40 years later, like chasing the dragon of that that election because it was such a momentous one, as you say. The other thing I want to mention, because you know it is on brand for us to be procedurally nerdy as well, is that the way that the Miller government was defeated was by a motion in response to the throne speech, right? The government had presented its throne speech. Miller had presented a throne speech to the House. The legislature gets to debate a motion in response to the throne speech, and the substance of the motion was amended by the Liberals and the NDP, saying, like, functionally, I think the amendment was, notwithstanding everything that was in the throne speech, we have no confidence in this government.
These guys got to go. Yeah.
And that's an amendment that the government or that the legislature voted on. The Tories rather lost the vote, and Mr. Miller appropriately went to the lieutenant governor and said, "I can't keep going." So,
I got to say, I knew Frank Miller reasonably well. He was actually a great guy, but he was older than Bill Davis, whom he succeeded, and David Peterson was a kind of a young, fresher face at that time, and Frank Miller just, you know, unfortunately for him and the Conservatives, was the wrong guy for the wrong time, and there you go.
yeah, it happens.
That's the way the cookie crumbles. Yeah. We do want to say one more thing before we go to issue 1, and that is some of you may have heard that Andrea Horwath, of course, the former leader of the Ontario New Democrats, now the mayor of Hamilton, had a very bad fall at City Hall and ended up having to go to the hospital. You got some deets on that, eh?
Yeah, it's reported that she fell on the stairs outside of Hamilton City Hall during the very windy conditions that we had here in the GTA on Tuesday, and I believe broke her wrist. So, obviously that can be a pretty serious injury.
Yeah, no fun at all. So best wishes to Andrea Horvath, and we hope you'll get well soon.
Yeah, now you have a Hamilton reference and a Bill Davis reference, and we haven't even gone to issue one.
We're like 3 minutes in, and I've already checked 2 boxes. There we go.
I do have one other thing, just a quick update on a court case we have discussed previously on the podcast. This is the case of Mathur v. Ontario, where young Ontarians are suing the government over the decision by the Ford government early in its tenure to weaken provincial climate pollution targets. The trial court agreed that the change in policy would harm young people, but did not believe that this was a charter right issue. The Court of Appeal heard that case last year and disagreed with the decision of the trial judge, saying that the case had to be reheard with a different sort of charter analysis. On Thursday, the Supreme Court of Canada declined to hear the government's appeal of this case. So the decision of the Court of Appeal, Ontario's highest court, stands. The case will now be reheard by a trial court, again with a different analysis imposed. So this story is not over yet. We will be keeping an eye on it as it develops. I guess it has to go through the courts one more time and potentially could be heard by the Supreme Court at some point in the future.
While we're on the issue of courts and judges, oh my goodness, do we have a great story to tell, and we'll do it right now. Off to issue 1. On Wednesday of this week, Doug Ford was at a press conference with Attorney General Doug Downey to introduce some legislation around bail reform. But boy, did it go off the rails when reporters asked the Premier about the province's plans for judicial appointments. Let's have a look.
You know, one of these judges that are bleeding hearts, I can't wait till they retire. Matter of fact, I'll pay him to retire earlier. I'll pay you out for 2, 3, 4 years. Just get out of the system. You think these judges just come out of the blue? You think the appointments from the federal government? Do you think that the Liberal government for the last 10 years is going to appoint a tough on crime, conservative-minded judge? Not a chance. Not a chance. We're going to hire tough on crime judges and JPs, and they need to do their job. Simple as that. But every judge in this country has been politically appointed since before Moses. Maybe Moses was even politically appointed. I don't know. But I'll guarantee you one thing, we're going to be tough on crime. Simple as that.
Now, that's only a minute of the screed that the Premier went off on judges. There was lots before that. There was lots more after that. We may play another clip later. About
also, questionable theology there about Moses
I don't
being politically appointed.
I don't think Moses was a politically appointed judge, now that I think of it. That's a good point. Anyway, what's this hubbub all about?
So the government is rolling out a major piece of, let's call it, crime and public safety legislation, and the Premier's remarks were specifically discussing legislation around bail. The conditions in which people can be released on bail is a federal issue that the province has had numerous complaints about. But the Premier is angry about judges releasing accused people on bail. And there have been some high-profile examples of people accused of crimes out on bail who then go on to be accused of further crimes.
Right.
Whenever we discuss bail, I feel like it is important to point out that, people are innocent until they are proven guilty, and the reason people are out on bail is because the state has not yet convicted them of a crime. Obviously, people can have different views about how well the process is working right now, but I think it is important to say that. Ford continued. He spoke about, he had many opinions about judges this week. He spoke about the injunction that was placed on the government. We talked about this last week about removing bike lanes in Toronto. Ford argued that we should start electing judges, something we do not generally do in Canada. Here is a clip of that.
And we ran on a mandate. We got elected democratically. Last time I checked, there hasn't been any judges elected. Maybe that's the problem. We should do what the U.S. does. Let's start electing our judges, holding them accountable. And that's my rant for the day, because I've just had it. We get elected to move forward, and some judge, because of the ideology, decides, well, let's put an injunction on bike lanes. You got to be kidding me. The system is broken. Over to you, Attorney General. Sorry, it made me feel better. I've been meaning to get this off my shoulders for 7 years.
You should see what he says in private.
Good line, Doug Downey. I'm not sure this is the best time to be saying that we ought to do anything like what the Americans do, Premier, with all due respect. But he came pretty close to calling out a particular judge by name there, did the Premier. And what is the conventional wisdom around doing that?
I mean, let me back up 1 second. It is a point of great frustration among journalists that when the government does not want to talk about something before the courts, they will just say, oh, well, we don't discuss a matter before the courts. We don't discuss it. They zip their lips and, you know, they decline to talk publicly about matters of public importance, and they wildly over-apply that rule. There is a genuine rule that in some cases elected officials should not talk about matters before the courts. Elected officials in Canada way overuse that rule, and journalists get very frustrated about it. So it's very funny to me that the Premier is now going off on a specific judge where a specific decision is still waiting to be issued. He's clearly quite upset about this injunction.
This is on the bike lanes.
Yes, the government had brought forward its law to remove certain bike lanes in Toronto. The judge heard the case, is in the midst of making the decision about whether the way that these bike lanes were removed or the way this law was passed, whether that violates a charter right. And it comes dangerously close to undermining people's confidence in the judicial system when you start accusing people of ideological accusation or ideological decisions at only minutes after demanding, in fact, a tough on crime ideological determination by other judges.
Well, obviously the Premier can say whatever he wants. He's the Premier of Ontario, but it has been a longstanding tradition that politicians, particularly as you say, with the decision not yet even having been released, politicians publicly putting pressure on judges to decide a case that the province has an interest in a particular way. We don't usually do that. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I'm not unsympathetic to certain arguments by, I will say, broadly speaking, right of center legal observers who, in fact, think that, courts are over applying certain sections of the Charter in ways that are thwarting the ability of elected governments to make policy. That's a much larger decision, and sometimes I think there's substance to it, and sometimes I think people protest too much. But this, when the Premier himself calls it a rant, I think we're allowed to fairly call it a rant. I don't think this rant was helpful.
Yeah. Let's, just for argument's sake here, go down this path and talk about electing judges. Obviously, they do elect some judges in the United States. They have to run for office on platforms. They raise money. They put ads on TV, et cetera, et cetera. We don't do that here.
No.
What's the advisability of doing it?
I mean, the idea of elected judges kind of fills me with horror because when you can see how it in practice it actually works in the U.S. where, like, for example, there was a state Supreme Court election. My God, the idea of like electing Supreme Court justices, like, but there was a state Supreme Court election not that long ago in which Elon Musk dumped millions of dollars
in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin, it dumped millions of dollars. He did not get his preferred candidate on that state Supreme Court, but what we want in a court system is a measure of judicial independence. In Canada, the way we have gotten that judicial independence is through appointments, yes, by political people, right? The Prime Minister names all of the most important judges in the country, the Supreme Courts, the Federal Court, and the
Court of Appeal for Ontario.
Exactly right. But nobody's pretending that the process can be entirely walled off from politics, but the process and the way we talk about the judicial system in this country has never been as thoroughly politicized as it is in the U.S. The argument for elections is that you are making the process independent of those elected representatives, that you're functionally putting the decision in the hands of the people themselves. Again, like a nice thought in principle. In practice, I don't think we love the way it actually works in the U.S.
The Premier had a funny line where he said, you know what, the next election, I want to see the Progressive Conservatives run candidates, the Liberals run candidates, New Democrats run candidates, Greens run candidates, and the judges run candidates, and let's all run against each other. I don't know. Can we go on the record here as saying that's kind of not the way we do things in Canada? And I don't know, has it served us pretty well to do it our way as opposed to the American way for 100 and almost 67 years or whatever it is?
Yeah. I would love for everybody to sort of take a breath, and it's not the judges are beyond criticism by any stretch. We should debate important judicial decisions. Clearly, the Premier has his arguments about recent judicial decisions, but the idea of making this another partisan battleground just fills me with dread.
Well, this was a really quite significant news conference this past week on Wednesday because the Premier was asked a bunch of other things, and we'll go into some detail about those right now as well. He was asked why he didn't come out and campaign in the federal election with his Conservative cousin, Pierre Poilievre, to make a tough-on-crime joint statement together. And here's what he had to say about that. Doug Ford.
Last time I checked, Pierre Poilievre never came out in our election. Matter of fact, him or one of his lieutenants told every one of his members, don't you dare go out and help the PCs. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, not a lot of love there between the two. We talked last week about that election night screed by the MP from Durham, Jamil.
I regret to inform you that was still this week.
Oh, gosh, that's right. That was still this week, wasn't it?
What does time mean anymore?
That's right. That was, when did we do that? That was Tuesday. Yeah,
yes.
That was Tuesday night. That's right. And it actually was Wednesday morning, I think. It was after midnight when Jamil Giovanni went on that screed. Is that right?
No, the election was Monday. You and I discussed it on Tuesday. It was either very late Monday or early Tuesday morning.
Why don't I just quit while I'm behind? No, anyway, there is actually a point I'm trying to make here somewhere if I can get my timing right. Jamil Giovanni, elected in Durham region, used to work for Doug Ford.
Yes.
Had a very significant break with Doug Ford, gave an interview to David Common on CBC television, whenever it was, Monday night, Tuesday morning, calling Doug Ford's campaign team a bunch of goons. He chided the Premier for making what he thought were unhelpful comments about the federal Conservative campaign team during the writ period. And just in case you thought that everybody had got their lines out and now was a time to tone things down and get the federal and provincial parties sort of singing from the same hymn book, no, that did not happen. Check out what Jamil Giovanni tweeted on Wednesday. And if you're listening to this as opposed to watching us, I'm going to describe this. This is a shot of Doug Ford, almost like he's in WWE, ripping off a T-shirt that says Ontario PC on the front, only to reveal underneath a shirt that says Liberal on the front, as if to say the Premier is really a closet Liberal. And this is, of course, like a meme of Hulk Hogan from wrestling. So we know that there is...
So proud of you that you got that reference.
How about that? Yeah. We know there's a huge feud between the Ford people and the Poilievre people. I am guessing this is not going to lower the temperature in that feud.
No, I suspect not. Ford was also asked what it would take to build bridges between the parties. And it's worth saying that, of course, Premier Ford is not the only one having difficulties with the federal Conservative Party. Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston is also on the outs, I guess. Ford has said that, they can pick up the phone anytime and give him a call. Perhaps he was reminding people that Poilievre did not phone Ford to congratulate him on his election victory not that long ago.
I think he waited 3 weeks before making that call. Yeah. Anyway, we got something on that?
I believe we've got a clip on that as well.
Fire away.
Well, all they have to do is make a phone call. I like a lot of the MPs, but the people spoke, and they spoke loud and clear. They spoke loud and clear in our election, and they spoke loud and clear on the federal election. And so that's democracy. They elect who they want.
I can tell you, the Premier usually has 1 or 2 news conferences every week to announce something of some significance in provincial policy.
And we don't grab a clip from everyone. But
we sure don't, because I can tell you, they're not all as interesting or entertaining as that one was from earlier this week. That was something.
Sometimes it's a feast.
Yeah, indeed it was. All right, let's get on to issue 2. The Financial Accountability Office of Ontario has released a new report on the potential impact of Donald Trump's tariffs on Ontario's economy, and it is not a pretty picture. JMM, let's go through the deets on that.
Right. Just to remind our audience, as always, the FAO is an independent government officer, a legislative officer. They do not answer to the government directly. They are named by the legislature acting collectively. And so they have provided two scenarios in their most recent report that was issued on Wednesday, one that is a low tariff impact scenario and one that is a high impact scenario. So some of the highlights from their low impact model. Based on the tariffs as they stand now, Ontario's real GDP will slow to 0.6% growth, which is less than half of the 1.7% growth that would have happened in the no tariff scenario, which means that there could be a modest recession this year. The FAO estimates that there will be 68,100 fewer jobs in 2025 and 119,200 fewer jobs in 2026 compared to the no tariff scenario. We've talked a lot about inflation the last few years. The Ontario Consumer Price Index, which is a measure of inflation, would rise a little bit, but might be offset by weaker economic activity and lower fuel prices.
Needless to say, none of that is good news. And as you might have imagined, the Premier had something to say about that at this week's very prominent news conference as well. Doug Ford.
I'm going to disagree with that. Let's see what happens. We have a newly elected government federally. I'm sure the Prime Minister will be going down there to talk to President Trump. The only thing that we will accept is zero tariffs. It's simple as that. I always look at the glass as half full, and no one can predict the future, but I'm predicting that we're going to do better than other jurisdictions around the world and around North America.
Now, I don't have to tell anybody watching or listening to this that Donald Trump has not exactly been a portrait of consistency during the time that he's been announcing these tariffs. You know, they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off, they're 10%, they're 25%, they're 200%. So how does the FAO, the Financial Accountability Office, deal with all of that uncertainty?
Right. So we've talked about the low impact scenario. That assumes that tariffs will decline from 25% to 10%. But the high impact scenario assumes that the U.S. will introduce further tariffs on lumber, steel, aluminum, and cars, and that Canada will retaliate in kind. In that scenario, job losses would be greater and the recession would be deeper. The report also looks into the near future. If the tariffs continue by 2029, Ontario's exports of steel and aluminum would be 50% lower, auto exports 20% lower, and auto parts 30% lower. Obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but some of the worst impacts really would be concentrated in Ontario's manufacturing sector. So you're talking about job losses potentially all throughout Southern Ontario and particularly the Southwest. What the report doesn't cover is what impact potential fiscal supports from both the federal government and the provinces might be able to do to offset some of these harms. Those efforts obviously could soften the blow somewhat, but the problem with manufacturing is that so many of the things we make are parts that go into American finished products, like cars, most obviously. And if they stop buying parts from us for their products, or they just stop being able to buy them because of the tariffs, it's a real open question about how much money or how much good federal or provincial money can do if this drags on for years and years and years. So lots and lots of big questions. I do also want to say one other thing that I don't think this report really is capable of asking is, even if Trump were to drop all tariffs on Canada tomorrow, but he maintains the tariffs on China, we're looking at some really nasty economic times in the U.S. just because of that. And if America goes into a recession because of the stuff that's going on between Trump and China, that is also likely to drag Canadian economic growth down as well, even if the tariffs themselves go away, as the Premier and the Prime Minister would both clearly want. So lots of things that are, frankly, unknown unknowns, to use the Donald Rumsfeld's line.
Mm-hmm. A very unhappy scenario, regardless of which scenario we're talking about. And with that, we're off to issue 3. There are more than 1,000 cases of measles in the province of Ontario. 1,000. Now, for some context here, between 2013 and 2023, there were only 100 cases. So we have 10 times as many cases in 1 year as we did during an entire decade. Many people are left wondering, where is Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kieran Moore? JMM, do we have an answer to that?
We do. Can I stop for 1 second and say, it's 5 years since COVID, and I thought I had processed a lot of my feelings about the pandemic. And then I went to Public Health Ontario's website and I looked up their reports on measles, and they are laid out in the same template as all of the old COVID reports were.
Oh boy.
And I had a real flashback moment yesterday at my desk, looking through all of the data broken out by public health units. And, it's fine. I'm fine. But it was just a reminder of what it was like several years ago. About the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Moore put out a statement back in March and has spoken with journalists saying that the outbreak has stabilized, but we are looking at hundreds of cases per week, sometimes 100 cases this week, which is a lot considering measles is incredibly infectious. I mean, back when we were talking about COVID, one of the things I heard from doctors and other medical practitioners was thank God COVID isn't as infectious as measles, right? That was the standard that they were using to set it against. It really would have been a nightmare. Measles is, I think we associate it with as kind of like a childhood disease, but it is not just a rash. It is not just a cough or a runny nose. In some cases, it can lead to pneumonia, brain swelling, and tragically, in some cases, death. Many children are too young to be vaccinated. This, again, something we remember from COVID, but in general, we do not vaccinate children against measles under a year old. So they are at risk, and many older adults may have only received one shot. They may have received a shot many, many years ago and might have some natural immunity, but their vaccinations might be out of date. So this is all to say that there is potential for this to get bad in ways that we do not want it to get bad. The MPP for Don Valley East and himself a doctor, Adil Shamji, was left wondering where Kieran Moore is in all of this. And we do have a clip. Let us take a look at what he said.
I shouldn't be the one standing at the podium here. Members of the government and Ministry of Health should be. The public deserves regular updates. But the last official update that anyone received was a press release from the Chief Medical Officer of Health in mid-March. And what parent reads press releases?
This is an interesting question. Dr. Kieran Moore was in front of the cameras a lot during COVID, and then he wasn't. And the assumption was that he was kind of told by the government to take a lower profile, and now we haven't seen him in front of the cameras during this measles outbreak.
Yes.
What's going on?
Well, Dr. Moore has said that the province is addressing the issue at a more local, granular level, if you want to put it that way. They have been dealing with some of the Mennonite communities in the southwest of the province where the outbreak has really been most prominent. They are translating information into Low German, which was not something that had occurred to me, but public health has to be creative and flexible, right? They are putting these Low German messaging out on radio and print advertisements. He says they are taking a more targeted approach. And I think it is worth acknowledging that there's at least an argument that raising the salience, raising all the prominence of vaccine messaging might not be helpful in terms of convincing people to go and get their shots. Certainly we saw by the end of COVID, certainly things had become so politically polarized that people were getting very resistant to vaccination. Vaccine skeptics exist in many communities. There are also, of course, matters of religious conviction. Some people just avoid because of that. And nevertheless, I think it is uncontroversial at this point to say that the best way, and in fact the government's position when they are asked, they say the right thing, which is that the best way to control the spread of measles is to get vaccinated, particularly for children to be protected.
Well, I think you and I both have a lot of admiration and respect for a guy named Andre Picard, who's probably the leading health columnist in the country, writes for the Globe and Mail. He too has been wondering where Dr. Moore has been, why he isn't showing more public-facing leadership on this issue. He said that Dr. Moore should stop defending the Ontario law that allows parents to opt their children out of vaccination on religious or philosophical grounds, What do you think about that?
I mean, this is an issue that, again, it came up during COVID when I and others were asking the government whether they would list COVID-19 as one of the diseases that you could potentially suspend children from school for if they weren't immunized. This is a long-standing policy because diseases spread among children in schools, and certain diseases can be very dangerous, like measles. Measles is on the list of diseases that children are nominally supposed to be vaccinated for, and they can, again, nominally be suspended if they do not get vaccinated. But Ontario's law is kind of full of holes. School boards and public health units can suspend students who are missing those vaccinations, but there are exemptions they can get. Moore has been quoted as saying that the outbreak will likely continue into the summer. Obviously, if students aren't in schools during the summer, then they lose that little bit of leverage of potentially suspending kids from school. That said, some public health units have started using this power. The Toronto Public Health, for example, suspended 173 students earlier this month for lack of vaccination documents. All that said, I think we can just take a moment and say, we can be honest about what's going on here, right? The government does not want to talk about vaccinations very loudly because a big chunk of the population is still very angry about vaccinations during COVID-19. The Ford government is not out here going full RFK Jr. on us, but clearly, a lot of their critics, a lot of Moore's critics, say that they could be doing a lot more than they are.
RFK Jr. is a new verb, is it? Going
Yes.
RFK Jr.?
Yeah, whatever else one can say about the state of public health in Ontario and in Canada, at least we don't have somebody at the highest reaches of government saying really obviously false things. So,
thank goodness for that. Let's get off to your column, my column. Okay, folks, time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I chat about the columns that we wrote for our website, tvo.org, over the past week. And as is our tradition here, Mr. McGrath goes first.
So this week I am writing about some of the obstacles, some of the challenges facing Mark Carney as he stays in the Prime Minister's office, but now he will be an elected leader with a Liberal caucus behind him. He will have his seat in the House of Commons for the first time. And, obviously, tariffs and the potential economic impact of tariffs and of Trump's, let's charitably call it an economic policy more broadly, that is obviously going to be job number one. But some of the problems that he will face really mirror the problems that Justin Trudeau faced, which is, for example, the stifling housing crisis that we have in this country, where, for better or worse, the federal government doesn't have the kind of political levers that it would like to be able to pull. But Mark Carney, like Justin Trudeau, is going to get a lot of the blame for it if the housing crisis continues. But as we've said before on this podcast, the answer to the housing crisis is going to happen at the provincial and municipal level much more than it's going to happen at the federal level. And the other thing that I will be very interested to see, I'm not a specialized federal politics watcher. You and I really do focus on provincial politics, but one thing I really want to see is more of the I guess interpersonal stuff, if I can put it that way. How does Mark Carney manage a Liberal caucus? How does he manage relationships with the opposition party in the House? Also, I don't get into this in the column as much, but how does Pierre Poilievre deal with his position? He will not have a seat in the House, at least not immediately. And how does he work with a not quite majority Liberal government, but one that seems relatively secure for now? Again, that will be something that I'm looking forward to seeing over the next little while.
A lot of dynamics at play there, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And you, Steve?
I wrote a column a couple of days ago about what I thought was one of the biggest stories in this federal election campaign, and about which there has been almost nothing said that I have picked up in all of my television watching, radio listening, and online reading. So I thought it was a big enough deal to write a column about it, and so I did. I am thrilled about the fact that we just had a federal election. We found out just a few hours after the polls closed who won that election. None of the party leaders in that election cried foul.
Yes.
Nobody said the vote was rigged. There were no sore losers. Nobody called up Elections Canada and said, can you find me 16,000 votes in Georgia, please? We had an election. It was clean. Everyone accepted the result.
Yes.
Democracy worked. Now, normally that would not be news. But in an era of Trump, where losing candidates routinely make false claims about how well elections either did or did not happen, I thought it was worth noting.
Yep.
So that's my column for this week. We had a good election in this country. I'm not talking about the outcome.
Yes.
I'm talking about the fact that it was clean and that people in this country see it as legitimate. And that's a beautiful thing.
Can I add one kind of petty criticism?
Please.
I want Elections Canada to adopt the electronic tabulation that we use here in Ontario. The results, they came in, reasonably quickly.
Wait a sec. You don't like taking a pencil and putting a check on the...
Well, you can still, in Ontario, it's like they have to use a Sharpie, but you still get to put a black mark on the ballot, right? We
Yes.
still have paper ballots here in Ontario. It's
But
just
you
that
stick it in a box?
You stick it in a machine, the machine counts it, and that's why we get the results so much faster in Ontario
I see.
than you do federally. We've now used electronic tabulation for multiple cycles here in Ontario. It is secure, it is fast, it is efficient, and you don't have to stay up until 2:30 waiting for the last of the polls in BC to come in. A very personal gripe on my part. But I would urge federal parties to fund some reforms at Elections Canada for the next cycle.
Okay, you're on the record with that. Let's get off to the mailbag. If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, please send it along to onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, remembering former Liberal leader Robert Nixon's admonition from last week, will now read a letter slowly and clearly so that everybody can hear it.
Have you heard from Mr. Nixon yet?
I have not yet.
Okay.
No, I'll check in with him, though. That's a good point. I should do that.
All right. So I have a pleasant surprise today for us. I received actual physical mail to our offices here in TVO. I received a letter from Rosemary Shepherd after we covered the recent Ontario throne speech. There will, of course, be a federal throne speech in weeks to come. But the Ontario throne speech included the notorious quote from Thomas Jefferson, who said that capturing Canada in the War of 1812 would be a mere matter of marching.
Apparently not.
Apparently not. And so Rosemary wrote, I am Windsor, Ontario, born and bred, and we learned in school that were it not for Chief Tecumseh and his braves, Windsor, Essex would have been taken by the U.S. Patriots. It's ingrained in the folks out here that we are not Americans because Indigenous people of that area fought with the British against them. Mm-hmm. And Rosemary includes this clipping from the Globe and Mail. She actually wrote a letter on the back of it about Bishop John Strawn, the first Anglican bishop of Toronto and member of the Family Compact. Look it up, folks, if you don't know that bit of your Ontario history. When Jefferson complained about the British when the British Navy sailed up the Chesapeake and burned Washington, D.C., Strawn wrote to Jefferson saying, can you tell me, sir, the reason why the public buildings and library at Washington should be held more sacred than those at York, which was, of course, the old name for what is now Toronto, and York had been burned by Americans. Really lovely historical detail there. And so I thank you so much to Rosemary for her letter.
That is lovely. Rosemary, well done. That's not the only one we have, though, right?
No, we have two this week. We also have a question from Gary Johnson in Stouffville, who writes, hi, Steve and JMM. On Tuesday, you were comparing the recent provincial election results with the federal election results. One factor you didn't mention is the provincial election was run under the existing electoral boundaries, whereas the federal election was held under the new riding boundary alignment. I think that might have had some difference on the outcome, although probably not consequential. I was in the Markham-Stouffville riding previously, but with the change, I was in this large, sprawling rural riding of York-Durham. It sure made a difference for me. Your thoughts? Gary Johnson, Stouffville, Ontario.
Okay, let me jump in on this. Gary, fair point, I guess, but only to a point. We've got to remember here that Ontario provincially has 124 ridings. Federally, it has 122. Not a huge difference there. And if you look at the total vote, Pierre Poilievre got about 1 million more votes than Doug Ford did in the same province. But of course, in our first past the post system, it matters where those votes are. So follow me if you will here. Doug Ford got 2.2 million votes. That won him 80 seats. Pierre Poilievre got 3.3 million votes, only good for 53 seats, 80 versus 53, despite 1 million more votes. Ford's vote was a lot smarter, a lot more efficient, and that obviously makes a difference in our system.
Yes, well, and Ford kept the opposition parties much more neatly divided than we saw federally. Another point I will make, and this goes back to your column about people not complaining or saying that the vote was rigged. I did, in fact, see some people, and not serious people, I will say that these are not prominent conservatives or anything like that, but they were complaining that the boundaries of Pierre Poilievre's former riding of Carleton had been rejigged in a way that might have contributed to his loss in that riding. And actual serious analysts pointed out that, in fact, the way the borders were rejigged ought to have made Pierre Poilievre's riding more conservative friendly than it had previously been. So, these adjustments, they can matter. They don't always matter in ways that are obvious.
And let's also remind people that unlike in the United States, where they have legislatures gerrymander the borders of the ridings or of the districts down there, in order to make them as felicitous as possible to the people in power, there are neutral people who make up a commission who study these issues, and it's not partisan at all. It's completely nonpartisan, and they make the boundaries. You may not love them all, but they don't make them for partisan reasons. They make them to make sure that the ridings have as many people in them, as many as the same as is possible.
Yeah, and again, this is like judges, we were saying earlier, absolutely fair to criticize some of the decisions of the boundary commissions, right? Here in Toronto, there was a really acrimonious argument about the loss of the riding of Don Valley East.
Yeah.
But
that was Michael Cotto's riding.
Exactly right.
But he won anyway.
Yeah, so
he picked another riding and he won anyway.
Yeah. So, totally fair to argue about the details of how these boundaries are changed, but the effects are relatively marginal. One other quick thing I will just say, we still in Ontario, sometime in the next 4 years, have to talk about rejigging our own boundaries because they are now coming up on like a decade out of date. So that will be a matter that I will maybe ask the Attorney General about sometime in the future when he's not having to fob off intemperate remarks from the Premier.
I look forward to that. Give the email address and let's get out of here.
Right. If you would like to ask about any content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the OnPoli podcast for this Friday, May the 2nd, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available, and you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're from.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor, Laurie Few is the executive producer of Digital, John Ferry is the vice president, programming and content.
We always like to thank the studio crew for making the video podcast look so good, and a special shout out this week to Kathleen Black, who was responsible for getting these fabulous Premier's t-shirts done for me. Kathleen, 2 thumbs up for you. Thank you. And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye.